That old woman is the maid. My daughter-in-law told the grocery clerk with a smile on her face. Don't talk to her too much, or she'll hold up the line. The young cashier froze with a carton of eggs in her hand while I stood 3 feet away pretending to search for a coupon inside my purse. My son Ryan looked down at his phone as if he hadn't heard a word. The fluorescent lights above us hummed softly, and somewhere behind me a child was crying near the frozen food aisle, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat slowly turning cold inside my chest. I had spent 68 years learning how to stay graceful in humiliating moments. Widowhood teaches you that. Motherhood does too. But nothing prepares you for the moment your own family begins introducing you like you're part of the furniture. Nicole, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm right here. She gave a little laugh and placed her manicured hand on Ryan's arm. Oh, Evelyn, don't be sensitive. I'm joking. The cashier looked embarrassed. Ryan still wouldn't look at me. I folded the wrinkled coupon in half and placed it back inside my wallet without saying another word. The conveyor belt kept moving. Bread, soup cans, sparkling water, organic strawberries Nicole insisted on buying even though half of them always spoiled in the refrigerator. Ordinary groceries for an ordinary Saturday afternoon. Except suddenly, I felt like a stranger standing inside someone else's life. On the drive back to their house, nobody mentioned what happened. Nicole scrolled through social media in the passenger seat, while Ryan kept both hands tight on the steering wheel. I sat in the back beside the grocery bags, staring out the window at rows of neat suburban homes passing by under the pale October sky. Red and gold leaves covered the sidewalks. Halloween decorations swayed gently on porches. Everything looked warm and normal outside the car, which somehow made the silence feel even worse. 3 years ago, after my husband Walter passed away from a stroke, Ryan insisted I move into their guest suite temporarily. You shouldn't be alone, Mom, he'd said back then, his eyes full of concern. At the time, I believed him. I sold my smaller condo near Sarasota and moved closer to them in Connecticut so I could be near family, near my only son. At first, Nicole acted welcoming enough. She bought lavender towels for my bathroom and talked about family dinners and movie nights. But little things began changing slowly after the first year. She started introducing me differently around her friends. Evelyn helps us around the house. Then later, Evelyn keeps busy helping with chores. Last Christmas at her office party, I overheard her tell someone I was basically the live-in help now that I'm retired. Every time it happened, Ryan acted uncomfortable for a few seconds and then moved on like nothing mattered. That hurt more than Nicole's comments ever did. When we arrived home, I carried in the lighter grocery bags while Nicole disappeared upstairs to answer a phone call. Ryan unloaded the trunk without saying much. I noticed he avoided looking directly at me, the same way children avoid eye contact after being caught doing something wrong. Inside the kitchen, I quietly unpacked cans into the pantry while the dishwasher hummed beside me. My reflection stared back from the dark microwave door. Silver hair neatly pinned back. Light blue sweater. Small gold cross necklace Walter gave me on our 40th anniversary. I didn't look like a maid. I looked like a tired old woman trying very hard not to become invisible. A few minutes later, Nicole walked into the kitchen holding her phone. Oh, by the way, she said casually, we're having guests over next Friday night, so maybe keep things simple upstairs. Some people get uncomfortable around sadness. She smiled as though she'd said something thoughtful. I stared at her for a long moment, finally beginning to understand something I should have realized months ago. Nicole wasn't embarrassed of my grief. She was embarrassed of me. Ryan entered the kitchen carrying the last grocery bag. For one brief second, our eyes met. I waited for him to say something. Anything. But he just placed the bag on the counter and asked Nicole whether they still had enough wine for Friday. That should have been the moment I packed my things and walked away forever. But instead, I stayed silent. Long enough to learn exactly why Nicole was so desperate to make me look small. The following week settled over the house like a heavy gray blanket. Nicole spent most of her time preparing for the dinner party she planned to host on Friday night, moving through the kitchen with the sharp energy of someone arranging a performance instead of a family gathering. Every counter became covered with catering menus, flower catalogs, and little handwritten lists in neat black ink. She spoke constantly about centerpieces, imported cheeses, and wine pairings while I quietly folded laundry upstairs and tried to stay out of the way. The strange part was not her behavior. It was Ryan's. My son had always been warm once. Talkative. The kind of boy who used to call me during his lunch breaks just to ask whether I remembered the name of an old television show from his childhood. But now he moved through the house like a guest renting a room from strangers. Every conversation felt rushed. Every smile seemed borrowed. On Tuesday morning, I came downstairs early and found Nicole sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open beside a cup of cold coffee. She did not notice me at first. "No, I cannot keep waiting forever," she whispered sharply into her phone. "If she decides to stay another year, everything gets delayed." I stopped near the staircase, still hidden from view. Her voice lowered after that, too quiet for me to hear clearly, but I caught one sentence before she ended the call. "Ryan needs to stop feeling guilty." The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking wall clock above the pantry. I slowly stepped into the room pretending I had just come downstairs. Nicole immediately smiled. It was the polished smile she used around neighbors and waiters. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said brightly. "Did you sleep well?" I nodded and reached for the coffee pot. My hands stayed steady, but something cold had begun spreading through my stomach. That afternoon, I decided to organize the hallway closet beside the guest suite. It had become cluttered over the years with old coats, storage bins, and forgotten holiday decorations. I spent nearly an hour sorting through boxes before I noticed one labeled home file sitting behind a stack of blankets. The lid was slightly open. Inside were folders filled with mortgage papers, utility bills, and insurance documents. I almost closed it immediately. Then I saw my own name printed across one envelope in thick black marker. Evelyn Parker. Important. My fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside was a brochure for a senior living community nearly 40 miles away from town. Bright, smiling retirees stood beside a lake holding tennis rackets and coffee mugs while bold letters promised comfortable, independent living for your next chapter. Attached to the brochure was a handwritten note in Nicole's careful script. "Tour scheduled for November 12th at 2 p.m. I stared at the paper for a very long time. Nobody had mentioned any tour to me. Nobody had asked whether I wanted to leave. My chest tightened as memories began rearranging themselves inside my mind like puzzle pieces finally sliding into place. The comments about the house being crowded. The repeated conversations about simplifying my life. The way Nicole had recently started calling the upstairs guest suite temporary. Even Ryan's silence suddenly looked different now. Less like weakness, more like surrender. That evening, Ryan came home later than usual. I heard the garage door open while I sat alone in the den pretending to read a magazine. Nicole greeted him cheerfully near the front hallway, and I listened quietly as their voices drifted through the house. "Did you confirm Friday with the Hendersons?" she asked. "Yes," Ryan answered tiredly. "And what about your mother?" There was a pause. A long one. "I will talk to her soon," he finally said. Nicole lowered her voice after that, but I still heard enough. "Ryan, we cannot keep living like this forever." I folded the magazine closed and stared at the dark television screen across the room. My reflection looked small beneath the dim lamp beside the couch. For the first time since moving into their home, I realized something painful. I was not being treated like family waiting to heal. I was being managed like a problem they were trying to remove quietly. Friday arrived cold and windy, with heavy clouds hanging low over the neighborhood like wet wool. By noon, Nicole had transformed the house into something that looked more like a hotel showroom than a family home. White orchids covered the dining table. Tall candles stood beside polished wine glasses that sparkled beneath the chandelier. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers in the ceiling, while trays of catered food filled the kitchen counters. I stayed upstairs most of the afternoon folding sweaters and pretending not to notice how carefully Nicole was staging every detail of the evening. Around 4 o'clock, she knocked lightly on my bedroom door before opening it halfway. "Just a quick reminder," she said with that same polished smile. "Tonight is mostly business people, so things may feel crowded downstairs. You probably will not enjoy all the noise." I looked up from the armchair near the window where I had been reading. "This is still my home too," I answered quietly. For one brief second, something sharp flickered across her face before disappearing again. "Of course," she replied smoothly. "I only meant you should not feel pressured." Then she glanced around my room in a way that made my chest tighten. Her eyes lingered on my framed photographs, my knitting basket, the stack of books beside the lamp. Not warmly, more like someone mentally measuring space before moving furniture. After she left, I sat very still while rain tapped softly against the bedroom window. Downstairs, I could hear dishes clinking and cabinet doors opening and closing. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and expensive perfume. Suddenly, I remembered another dinner party nearly 20 years earlier, back when Walter was still alive and Ryan had just graduated from college. Our home in Sarasota had been full of laughter that night. Walter stood proudly beside the grill wearing his ridiculous apron with little flamingos printed across the front, while Ryan teased him for overcooking the steaks. Back then, family gatherings felt effortless. Nobody performed. Nobody calculated every word. We simply belonged to one another. The memory hurt more than I expected. Around 6:30, the first guests began arriving. Expensive coats, confident laughter, the low murmur of successful people greeting each other with practiced warmth. I remained upstairs at first, but eventually loneliness pushed me toward the staircase. I smoothed my navy sweater, adjusted Walter's gold cross around my neck, and slowly walked down. Conversation filled the living room in soft, polished waves. Nicole stood near the fireplace, holding a glass of white wine, while Ryan spoke with two men in tailored suits near the dining table. Nobody noticed me immediately. Then one of the guests smiled politely in my direction. "And you must be Ryan's mother," she said kindly. Before I could answer, Nicole laughed lightly from across the room. "Oh goodness, no," she said. "Evelyn helps us around the house. Honestly, I would fall apart without her." A strange silence followed. Not dramatic, just uncomfortable enough for everyone to feel it. The woman near me blinked in confusion and glanced back toward Ryan. My son gave a weak smile and took a sip from his drink without correcting Nicole. Something inside me went very still then. I had spent months telling myself these moments were misunderstandings, awkward jokes, generational differences. But standing there beneath the warm dining room lights while strangers quietly studied me, I finally understood the truth. Nicole was not accidentally diminishing me. She was carefully rewriting my place inside this family, one conversation at a time. A tall older gentleman standing near the buffet suddenly looked at me more closely. "Wait," he said slowly. "Evelyn Parker?" I turned toward him, startled. "Yes." His expression brightened immediately. "I knew I recognized you. My wife bought flowers from your shop for nearly 15 years back in Sarasota. You own Parker Gardens, did you not?" The room grew noticeably quieter. Nicole's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That was a very long time ago," I said gently. "Still," the man replied warmly, "your arrangements were famous in that town. My daughter still talks about the orchids you designed for her wedding." Across the room, I saw Nicole lower her wine glass slowly. For the first time since moving into this house, uncertainty flickered across her face instead of confidence. And Ryan, standing beside her, suddenly looked as though he had remembered something important he should never have forgotten. The atmosphere inside the house shifted after that moment, subtle enough that most people probably would not have noticed it. But I did. Nicole became overly cheerful for the rest of the evening, laughing too loudly at harmless jokes and refilling wine glasses before anyone asked. Ryan drifted nervously between groups of guests with the strained smile of a man trying to keep something fragile from breaking apart in his hands. Meanwhile, the older gentleman who recognized me continued speaking warmly about Sarasota and my flower shop, as though he had unknowingly opened a door nobody else in the room expected to exist. "My wife still says your Christmas arrangements were the most beautiful she had ever seen," he told me kindly while balancing a small appetizer plate in one hand. "You built quite a reputation down there." I smiled politely, but across the room I could feel Nicole watching every second of the conversation. Her expression remained pleasant, yet her eyes had gone cold and calculating again. The moment the guests finally left close to 11 o'clock, the warmth disappeared completely. Nicole stood near the kitchen counter gathering empty wine glasses with sharp, impatient movements, while Ryan loaded plates into the dishwasher without speaking. Rain still tapped softly against the windows outside. I quietly began folding linen napkins at the dining table, more out of habit than obligation. "You did not have to make things awkward tonight," Nicole suddenly said without looking at me. Her tone was calm, but there was something brittle underneath it. I slowly placed one folded napkin beside the others. I did not say anything inappropriate. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Ryan finally looked up from the sink. "Nicole," he muttered softly. "No, Ryan, let us be honest for once," she interrupted. She turned toward me fully then, crossing her arms tightly. Your mother enjoys making people feel guilty. She has done it ever since she moved in. The words settled heavily in the room. I stared at her quietly, almost amazed by how naturally they came to her now. Not embarrassment, not hesitation, certainty. Ryan rubbed one hand across his forehead, exhausted. Can we please not do this tonight? Nicole ignored him. We have spent 3 years rearranging our lives, she continued. 3 years walking on eggshells around grief and sadness and old memories. I noticed how carefully she said old memories instead of Walter's name, as though even mentioning my husband made her uncomfortable. Nicole, I said quietly, I never asked to become a burden. She looked at me directly then, and for the first time there was no fake politeness left in her face at all. That is the problem, she replied softly. You became one anyway. The dishwasher hummed in the silence that followed. Somewhere upstairs a floor vent rattled faintly as the heat turned on. Ryan stared down at the kitchen counter as though he wished he could disappear into it. I waited for him to defend me, to remind his wife that I had paid for half his college tuition after Walter lost his first business, that I had spent months helping care for Nicole after her difficult pregnancy years earlier, that I had sold my own home because they promised I would never feel alone again. But Ryan said nothing. He just stood there frozen between us, weak in the exact way that disappoints you more deeply than cruelty ever could. Nicole picked up another wine glass and shook her head. Honestly, tonight proved my point, she said. People hear one story about your flower shop, and suddenly they think you are some tragic society woman instead of someone who needs help. I folded the last linen napkin carefully before answering. I owned that business for 32 years, I said calmly. Your husband grew up because of that shop. The roof over his head came from those flowers. Nicole's mouth tightened. Ryan finally whispered, Mom, but his voice carried no strength behind it. I stood slowly from the table and smoothed my sweater sleeves. My hands no longer trembled the way they had in the grocery store days earlier. Instead, I felt strangely calm, as though a fog had finally lifted inside my mind. The cruelest part was not hearing what Nicole thought of me. It was realizing she had become comfortable saying it out loud because she no longer feared anyone would challenge her. The next morning, the house felt unusually quiet, as though even the walls were exhausted after the tension from the night before. I woke before sunrise and sat beside the bedroom window wrapped in Walter's old cream-colored cardigan, watching thin fog drift across the backyard lawn. The maple trees behind the fence had almost completely lost their leaves now, leaving dark, twisting branches against the pale morning sky. Somewhere downstairs I heard the coffee machine start automatically at 6 o'clock sharp, followed by the soft clicking sound of Nicole's heels crossing the kitchen floor. For a long time I remained upstairs thinking about everything she had said. Strangely, I did not feel angry anymore. Hurt, yes. Disappointed beyond words. But beneath that sadness, another feeling had begun settling quietly into place. Clarity. The kind that arrives slowly after years of ignoring truths you did not want to face. Around 7:30, I finally came downstairs. Nicole was already dressed for the day in a fitted beige coat with her car keys beside her coffee mug. Ryan stood near the sink loosening the knot of his tie while staring blankly out the window. Neither of them looked rested. Morning, I said softly. Ryan glanced toward me with visible hesitation. Morning, Mom. Nicole gave a polite nod without smiling. I poured myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Nobody spoke for nearly a full minute. Then Ryan cleared his throat awkwardly. About last night, he began. Nicole immediately picked up her phone. I have an early meeting, she announced quickly while slipping the device into her purse. She kissed Ryan lightly on the cheek and headed toward the garage without another word to me. The front door closed behind her a moment later. Silence settled over the kitchen again. Ryan rubbed both hands across his face and exhaled heavily. For the first time in months, he suddenly looked older too. Me. Not physically. Spiritually. Like someone carrying a weight he no longer knew how to put down. She did not mean everything the way it sounded, he finally said. I stared into my coffee cup for several seconds before answering. Then why did it sound exactly the same every time? He looked away immediately. That was always Ryan's tell when he knew he could not defend something honestly. As a child, he used to do the same thing after sneaking cookies before dinner. Only now the consequences felt far more painful than crumbs on a kitchen counter. Nicole has been stressed, he muttered quietly. With work and the house and finances. I looked up sharply at that word. Finances. What finances? Ryan hesitated too long. My stomach tightened. Ryan, I said carefully. Is there something happening that I should know about? He opened the refrigerator door without answering, pretending to search for something inside. It is complicated. I watched him closely then, suddenly remembering all the little details I had ignored over the past year. The constant private conversations between him and Nicole after bills arrived. The expensive kitchen remodel they started despite complaining about money. The fact that Ryan had quietly sold Walter's old fishing boat 6 months earlier, even though he once swore he would keep it forever. Are you in trouble financially? I asked softly. Ryan shut the refrigerator door harder than necessary. No, not exactly. Not exactly. The words echoed strangely inside my head. Before I could press further, his phone buzzed loudly against the counter. He glanced down at the screen and immediately tensed. Nicole, I have to take this, he said quickly before stepping out onto the back patio. Through the glass doors I watched him pace slowly across the deck while speaking in low, urgent tones. His shoulders stayed tight the entire time. At one point he turned and glanced back toward the kitchen, his expression filled with something I had not seen from him in years. Fear. Real fear. When he finally came back inside 10 minutes later, he forced a weak smile. I need to head into the office early. I nodded quietly. He grabbed his briefcase and car keys before pausing near the doorway. For one brief second, it looked as though he wanted to say something important. Instead, he just whispered, "We will figure things out, Mom." Then he left. I sat alone in the kitchen listening to the grandfather clock tick steadily near the hallway. We will figure things out. Not you will be okay. Not I am sorry. Something else entirely. Slowly I reached for the stack of unopened mail sitting beside the fruit bowl. Most of it belonged to Ryan and Nicole, but one envelope caught my attention immediately. Final notice was stamped across the front in red letters from a bank downtown. And for the first time, I began wondering whether Nicole's cruelty had never truly been about embarrassment at all. Maybe desperation was hiding underneath it. That afternoon, I could not stop thinking about the envelope from the bank. I left it exactly where I found it beside the fruit bowl, but the red letters stayed in my mind long after Ryan drove away. Final notice. The words carried a heaviness I recognized immediately. Walter and I spent decades building our lives carefully enough to avoid seeing envelopes like that. We paid mortgages early. We saved during good years because we remembered hard ones. Walter used to say financial trouble rarely appeared all at once. It arrived quietly, disguised as small decisions people convinced themselves they could fix later. By noon the house felt unbearably still, so I decided to walk to the little shopping plaza 2 blocks away. The cold air helped clear my thoughts as dry leaves scraped softly across the sidewalks beneath my shoes. Most of the stores were already decorated for Christmas, even though Thanksgiving had not arrived yet. Artificial snowflakes hung inside windows beside glittering lights and red ribbons. Everything looked cheerful in the way American suburbs always try to look cheerful before winter. I stopped at a small cafe near the pharmacy and ordered tea to go. As I waited near the counter, someone behind me suddenly said my name. Mrs. Parker? I turned and immediately recognized the young grocery store cashier from earlier that week. Lily. Up close, she looked even younger than I. First thought, probably in her mid-20s, with tired eyes and a kindness that seemed genuine rather than performative. I hope you do not mind me saying hello, she said carefully. I recognized you right away. I smiled politely. Of course not. She hesitated for a second before lowering her voice slightly. I actually wanted to apologize about what happened at the store the other day. Heat crept into my cheeks immediately. That was unnecessary, I said softly. No, Lily replied firmly. It was wrong. Something about the simple honesty in her voice caught me off guard. Most people avoid uncomfortable truths because acknowledging them requires courage. But this young woman stood there holding her coffee with complete sincerity written across her face. My mother worked as a housekeeper for years, she continued quietly. People spoke to her the way your daughter-in-law spoke about you sometimes. I recognized that look immediately. I stared down at my teacup for a moment, unsure what to say. Finally, I gave a small nod. Thank you. Lily smiled gently. For what it is worth, everyone at the store knew something felt off. Especially because your son looked so uncomfortable. The mention of Ryan tightened something painfully inside my chest again. Even strangers could see his silence now. Before leaving, Lily paused beside the cafe door. My grandmother always says people who work hardest to make others feel small usually have something falling apart in their own lives. Then she gave me one last kind smile and disappeared outside into the cold afternoon air. I remained standing there much longer than necessary, replaying her words in my mind. Something falling apart. By the time I returned home, the sky had already begun darkening. Nicole's white SUV sat crookedly in the driveway, as though she had parked in a hurry. The moment I stepped inside the house, I sensed tension immediately. Voices drifted sharply from the upstairs office near the hallway. Ryan and Nicole, arguing. I could not make out every word, but certain phrases carried clearly through the partially closed door. We cannot keep hiding this. Ryan sounded exhausted. You promised me refinancing would solve it. Nicole's voice came back lower, but sharper. And I told you your mother still has resources we have not touched. I froze halfway up the staircase. My pulse slowed into something cold and steady. Nicole, Ryan whispered harshly. Stop talking about her like that. There was a bitter laugh. Then maybe she should stop acting helpless while sitting on assets she barely uses. Assets. Not grief. Not space. Not emotional strain. Assets. Suddenly, every humiliating comment, every subtle insult, every push towards senior living communities rearranged itself into one terrible, clear picture. Nicole did not simply want me gone because I embarrassed her. She wanted access to whatever she believed still belonged to Walter and me. I quietly stepped back downstairs before either of them noticed me near the office. My hands remained perfectly calm as I removed my coat and hung it neatly beside the door. But inside, something important had changed forever. For the first time since Walter died, I stopped feeling like a burden trapped inside someone else's home. Instead, I began feeling like someone standing in the middle of a very carefully planned lie. For the next 2 days, I said almost nothing about what I had overheard upstairs. I moved through the house calmly, making tea in the mornings, folding laundry in the afternoons, quietly watering the small orchids beside my bedroom window. Nicole seemed relieved by my silence. Ryan looked confused by it. Every now and then I would catch him studying my face carefully, as though trying to determine whether I knew more than I was admitting. The truth was, I had finally stopped reacting emotionally because something much more useful had taken its place. Attention. Once pain stops clouding your judgment, people begin revealing themselves very quickly. On Monday afternoon, Nicole left for a hair appointment while Ryan remained downtown at work. I sat alone in the kitchen listening to rain tap softly against the skylight above the breakfast nook. The house smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and coffee grounds. After nearly an hour of staring at the same untouched magazine page, I finally stood up and walked quietly toward the downstairs office. Walter always used to say instincts should not be ignored twice. The office door was slightly open. Inside, stacks of paperwork covered the desk beside Ryan's laptop and a half-empty mug of cold coffee. I hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. At first glance, nothing looked unusual. Insurance forms, tax folders, mortgage statements. But then I noticed a thin black binder sitting partially hidden beneath a pile of utility bills. My name was printed across the tab. Evelyn Parker Estate Planning. A strange chill moved through me as I slowly opened it. Inside were copies of financial documents connected to Walter's trust, property evaluations, retirement accounts, investment summaries. And clipped neatly near the center was a yellow sticky note written in Nicole's handwriting. If Evelyn sells Sarasota property, debt pressure solved immediately. I sat down slowly in Ryan's desk chair. Sarasota property. My old commercial building. The flower shop. Walter and I never sold it after retirement because the upstairs apartment still generated rental income each month. Nicole knew that. Of course she did. My eyes continued scanning the documents. Credit card balances, loan extensions, missed payment notices. A second mortgage I had never heard about. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars buried beneath business investments that had apparently collapsed over the last 2 years. My hands remained perfectly steady while reading every page, but inside I felt something painful settle into certainty. Ryan and Nicole were drowning financially, and somewhere along the way they had decided I was the life raft. Suddenly, every insult carried a different meaning now. Nicole was not humiliating me because she looked down on older people. She was slowly stripping away my confidence, my independence, my authority. If I felt weak enough, lonely enough, guilty enough. Maybe eventually I would simply hand over everything without resistance. The realization hurt less than it should have. Maybe because deep down I already knew. I carefully returned every document exactly where I found it and closed the binder. As I stood to leave, my eyes landed on a framed family photograph sitting near the computer monitor. Walter smiling proudly between Ryan and me at Ryan's college graduation nearly 20 years earlier. Ryan looked so different back then. Open, hopeful, kind. I touched the corner of the frame lightly before stepping away. Your father would be heartbroken, I whispered softly into the empty room. That evening Ryan came home unusually early. He found me sitting alone on the back patio wrapped in a blanket while the cold autumn wind rattled dead leaves across the yard. For several seconds, he simply stood near the sliding door, watching me quietly. Mom, he finally said. I looked up calmly. Yes. He sat down across from me looking exhausted. Dark circles had settled beneath his eyes now, and there was tension in his jaw that never seemed to leave anymore. I know things have felt strained lately, he began carefully. Nicole and I have just been under pressure. I studied him silently for a moment. Financial pressure? The color drained slightly from his face. There it was again. Fear. Real fear. He opened his mouth, then closed it. You overheard us. I did not answer immediately. The wind carried the faint smell of rain through the backyard trees. Finally, I looked directly at my son and asked the question that had been growing inside me for weeks. Ryan, did you invite me into this house because you loved me, or because you needed something from me? He stared at me in complete silence, and somehow that silence answered everything. Ryan did not answer my question right away. He just sat across from me on the patio with both hands clasped tightly together while the wind pushed dead leaves across the wooden deck. In the fading evening light, he suddenly looked less like my grown son and more like the anxious little boy who used to hide unfinished report cards behind his back. Except now the stakes were much larger than poor grades or broken lamps. It was not supposed to become like this, he finally whispered. His voice sounded tired enough to break my heart if I had not already spent months watching him slowly help dismantle my dignity piece by piece. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and waited quietly. Ryan stared out toward the dark backyard for several long seconds before continuing. After the tech expansion failed, we thought we could recover quickly, he admitted. Nicole kept saying the market would turn around. Then the loans started stacking up. I said nothing. The sliding glass door behind us reflected our shadows back against the house. We refinanced twice, he continued softly. Then we borrowed against the house. There it was. The truth finally stepping into the open after hiding behind polite smiles and awkward silences for months. How bad is it? I asked calmly. Ryan rubbed his forehead slowly. Bad enough that we could lose everything by spring. I looked down at my hands resting quietly in my lap. Somewhere inside the house, I could hear Nicole moving around upstairs, probably unaware this conversation was happening at all. So Nicole thought humiliating me would convince me to hand over my property. Ryan flinched immediately. Mom, it was not supposed to feel like that. I almost smiled at the absurdity of the sentence. Feel like that. As though cruelty only mattered if someone admitted noticing it. What exactly was it supposed to feel like? I asked softly. Ryan opened his mouth, then stopped. The silence between us stretched painfully long. Finally, he looked at me with genuine shame clouding his face. At first we just thought maybe you would offer help on your own, he admitted quietly. Nicole kept saying if you stayed here long enough, eventually you would sell the Sarasota building and simplify things. Simplify things. Such a clean phrase for something so ugly underneath. Walter used to say people reveal themselves most clearly through the words they choose to soften their selfishness. I stood slowly from my chair and walked toward the patio railing, staring out into the dark trees beyond the yard. Your father built that shop with me, I said quietly. We spent 32 years working 6 days a week inside that building. Ryan lowered his eyes immediately. I know. Do you? I turned toward him fully then. Because lately it feels like both you and Nicole only remember my life when you need something from it. His face tightened with guilt. I never wanted to hurt you. The sadness in his voice sounded real. That was the hardest part. Ryan was not evil. Weakness rarely looks evil in real life. Most of the time it looks tired and frightened and eager to avoid conflict at any cost. But weak people still allow terrible things to happen when protecting themselves becomes easier than protecting someone they love. Does Nicole know you are telling me this? I asked. He shook his head quickly. No, before either of us could say another word. The patio door slid open sharply behind us. Nicole stepped outside wearing a long cream sweater with her phone still in one hand. The moment she saw our expressions, her entire body stiffened slightly. What is going on? She asked carefully. Ryan stood immediately, panic flashing across his face. Nothing. Nicole's eyes moved between us slowly. She knew instantly he had told me something. I could see it in the way her shoulders tightened beneath the porch light. Ryan, she said quietly, can we speak inside for a minute? He hesitated. For the first time in months, he did not rush to follow her immediately. Nicole noticed that too. Her face hardened almost imperceptibly. Then she looked directly at me and offered a small brittle smile. Evelyn, I hope you understand we have both been under enormous pressure. I met her gaze calmly. Pressure does not change character, Nicole. It reveals it. For one brief second, absolute silence settled across the patio. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Nicole's expression flickered with something dangerously close to anger before smoothing itself back into politeness. But it was too late now. The performance had cracked open, and standing there beneath the cold November sky, I realized something important. Nicole no longer looked at me like a helpless old woman. She looked at me like someone who had suddenly become difficult to control. The house changed after that night. Not dramatically. Nobody shouted. Nobody apologized. But the careful balance Nicole had maintained for years no longer existed. She stopped making casual jokes about me in front of strangers because she knew I finally understood what was happening beneath them. Ryan became quieter than ever, moving through the rooms with the heavy exhaustion of someone trapped between guilt and fear. And I began preparing my exit in silence. 3 mornings later, I woke before sunrise and opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were the things I had carried through every version of my adult life. Walter's watch, family photo albums, the tiny porcelain angel Ryan painted for me in 3rd grade. I wrapped each item carefully in tissue paper and placed them into 2 small suitcases. Not because Nicole wanted me gone. That part no longer mattered. I packed because I finally realized staying there was slowly teaching me to accept disrespect as normal. And Walter had loved me far too well for that. Around 9 o'clock, I called an old friend in Sarasota named Diane who still managed several rental properties downtown. By noon, she had already arranged a small furnished cottage near the marina overlooking the water. You can stay as long as you need, she told me warmly over the phone. And Evelyn, stop sounding like you are asking permission to exist. I laughed softly for the first time in weeks after hearing that. Late that afternoon, Ryan came home early and found my suitcases beside the guest room door. He froze immediately. Mom. I zipped the final bag calmly before turning toward him. I signed a lease this morning. The color drained from his face. You are leaving? Yes. He stared at the suitcases as though they had appeared out of nowhere. You do not have to do this. I looked at him quietly for a long moment. Actually, Ryan, I do. He sat heavily on the edge of the hallway bench and buried both hands in his hair. I know we made mistakes, he whispered. But we can fix this. The sadness in his voice felt genuine again. That was what made everything so tragic. Somewhere underneath the fear and weakness, my son still existed. Buried perhaps, but not completely gone. I sat beside him slowly. Do you know what hurt the most? I asked softly. He looked up at me with exhausted eyes. Not Nicole's comments. Not the lies. It was watching you stay silent while someone slowly erased my place in this family. Tears filled his eyes immediately. I was trying to keep everything from falling apart. I nodded gently. And in the process, you allowed yourself to fall apart instead. The hallway remained quiet except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. After several seconds, Ryan whispered, I am sorry, Mom. The words landed softly between us. Too late to undo anything, but honest enough to matter. I touched his hand briefly before standing again. I believe you, I said. But apologies do not rebuild trust overnight. Nicole arrived home an hour later carrying shopping bags from an upscale department store. The moment she saw my luggage near the front door, she stopped walking. For the first time since I met her, she looked genuinely unsettled. What is this? She asked carefully. I am moving out tomorrow morning, I answered calmly. Her expression flickered rapidly between relief and uncertainty. She had wanted this outcome for months. Yet somehow now that it was happening, she no longer looked victorious. Well, she said after an awkward pause, perhaps some distance will be healthier for everyone. I studied her face quietly. Then I smiled. Not bitterly, not cruelly, just clearly. You spent a very long time trying to convince people I was the help, I said softly. But Nicole, the interesting thing about servants is that eventually they stop cleaning up other people's messes. Absolute silence followed. Ryan looked down at the floor immediately. Nicole's face paled slightly beneath the hallway light. The next morning I left before sunrise. As the car pulled away from the house, I looked back only once. The windows glowed softly against the cold gray dawn, while dead leaves drifted across the driveway. 3 years earlier, I arrived there grieving and vulnerable, believing family automatically meant safety. Now I understood something far more important. A person does not lose dignity because they grow older. They lose it the moment they begin accepting treatment that makes them forget their own worth. My phone rang twice during the drive south. Ryan. Then again 20 minutes later. I let both calls go to voicemail while the early morning sunlight slowly spread across the highway ahead of me. And for the first time since Walter died, the road in front of me no longer felt lonely. It felt free.